Good evening and welcome back to another episode of Since I Was Young, the podcast dedicated to all things Heart of Midlothian. And well, here we are yet again, having obviously witnessed Hearts get a good domestic win against Dundee last week, which showed some signs of progression and some shoots of encouragement and positivity. We come crashing back down to earth again. We obviously faced Copenhagen in the Europa Conference League, and we kind of wrote that game off as a game we were not likely to get a result, and so it became we didn't get a result. We spent 90 minutes chasing shadows and were beaten by a side that are significantly better than us. However, that is not the game that we will be discussing this evening. The game that we will be discussing this evening is far worse than that, I would suggest, and that was the return to domestic action when we took on Kilmarnock in Ayrshire on Sunday, where this is the season of giving, and we gift wrapped Kilmarnock 3 points, I would suggest. But before we dive into it and we dissect the game and obviously people's thoughts and the manager's reaction, as well as some of the player reactions as well, which I've seen over the last couple of days, as per usual, folks, please do consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. The links to all our socials are in the description, so please, if you do so wish, please feel free to follow us on all of our channels and keep updated with our content. Whether you want to keep up to date with Hearts news at the moment or not, and unlike me, if you're like me rather, and you just want to write it off and forget that football exists for a little bit, because I've kind of over the last few hours or last few days rather, I don't know about you, John, but I tend to. It takes me probably like a day to get over a bad defeat or a bad result, depending on the game, depending on the performance. I'm still fizzing about Sunday, and at time of recording, this is Tuesday evening. So I'm still fizzing, and I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to keep my composure in this week's episode. I will try my hardest. Those of you that have been listening for a long time will know that a lot of these sort of episodes turn into sort of therapy sessions for me, and I think we're in for one of those today. Yet again, I have absolutely no notes and I have no preparation whatsoever. So we will see where we go with this week's episode. But yes, as I say, before we get dived in, the more important question, John, how are you getting on today?
I was fine until we hit record, and I remembered to have to talk about Heart of Midlothian tonight. Uh, it's going to be a very tall ask for me not to drop a large payload of f bombs on the podcast this week. I'm going to do my best to restrain myself. Um, yeah, we're going to talk about it in depth, I suppose,
Yeah.
in as much depth as that lot deserve at this point
Mm.
in time. But not great.
No, not great indeed. Not great indeed. I think we should just get dived straight in. Obviously, we had the recent news of Stephen Kingsley, his season effectively being over due to injury. We were informed just prior to the Kilmarnock game that Frankie Kent suffered a similar fate, and they didn't suggest a time frame for his recovery, but they said a lengthy layoff period. So I don't know if there's been any update if he needs surgery or not since I read the article about it, but I think it was a ruptured quad or something to that effect. So seems like it could be a very, very costly one for us. And I think it gets us down to the bare bones of defenders. You know, we spoke about it and you spoke about it specifically on last week's episode where we kind of discussed Halkett and roles as a two and who was better and who had, you know, the different attributes, etc. And I think it was yourself that said we're one more defensive injury away from a crisis. And then obviously, lo and behold, Frankie Kent decides to join Kingsley in the treatment table. But yeah, so we started against Kilmarnock with the back two of Halkett and Rolls. Obviously, I was pleased to see Craig Halkett back as I am and as I have been, but I did have that fear of injury-prone centre half playing on a plastic pitch. Something could give there, but I'm delighted that he managed to last the 90 minutes, even though obviously the result was not good. It was certainly nice to see Halkett play a full game, and I thought, and it's going to sound bizarre to say it, but I do think Halkett and Rolls they kind of come out of the game relatively all right, considering the overall performance and the overall result. I don't think Halkett and Rolls were all that bad. They were certainly not the worst players in the park by a distance, but obviously it looks as if we're going to be kind of relying on that partnership at least to get us to January. So I think rather than have them in training, Critchley should just be wrapping them up in cotton wool and letting them have days off, I think.
I think particularly Craig Halkett, but certainly our centre half pairing that we've kind of de facto been left with. These are the first choice centre backs at this stage.
Yeah.
They definitely need to have their training workload very carefully managed over the next few weeks, because if we lose either of them, we're absolutely screwed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
some would argue, myself included, that we're absolutely screwed in so many ways already, but we'll get into that. I did mention last week that I felt that whether or not Halka can get back to his best, I do feel like he could prove to be a saviour of sorts in the defence. Unfortunately, that's been proven to be the case far sooner than even I had remotely anticipated. Um, with Kent having a ruptured quad, if that is the injury, his season is probably effectively over as well. As you probably know, I think you know, Alan, I've had two very serious hamstring injuries, not too dissimilar to the one that Kingsley's dealing with at the moment in the last few years playing baseball. And I didn't require surgery, and I was out for 3 months last year with one of them. And I'm not a professional athlete. They are dealing with like a much higher level, and it's the margins are much thinner between, you know, a lengthy period on the sidelines and like a significantly lengthier one. Certainly, Kingsley is dealing with that in terms of having to get surgery and stuff. He's probably not going to be back this season. Kent, I doubt he'll be back either. Certainly
Yeah.
not before April, May time.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Mm-hmm.
need to shore up the defence, I think, in January with as a priority, with urgency, which I think is going to have a knock-on effect on the rest of our transfer dealings, because it means that our search for a striker is going to have to be on the back burner ever so slightly until we do get that sorted out, because we don't just need one, we probably need two centre halves, whether that be a signing and a loan, or a couple of loans to get us until through the summer. Who knows? But that's the Jamestown people are going to get tested quite early on. I think this is
Yeah.
going to be where they're going to step up and say, right, here's what we can do for you guys, and hopefully we can manage to get some decent players in without having to spend too much money. Certainly,
Yeah.
there are a few players at Hearts that could well and quite frankly should leave in January. So hopefully we can bring in a bit of money that way as well. I would be paying other clubs to take some of that lot though, because
I think we might have to.
that dis- aye, that display at the weekend was shameful.
Yeah,
I'm
completely.
embarrassed to be a Heart supporter after that. It was disgusting,
Yeah.
absolutely shameful.
No, I
Oddly
totally
enough,
agree.
we weren't. Yeah, oddly enough, we weren't terrible defensively for the most part across the game, with the exception of Penrice's. Penrice has been by and large our best player this season, so he does get
Yeah.
one. It just came on a very unfortunate time, because that penalty was our undoing, and we should have destroyed Kilmarnock at the weekend.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
everyone other than Craig Gordon in the centre halves, it seemed like, went on vacation mentally. It was a disgraceful performance.
Yeah, no, I'm totally agreeing with you. Obviously, I mean, we went into the game against Kilmarnock knowing that 3 points would have potentially lifted us up to eighth place, and that would have been a big step forward, because it is very tight at the bottom end of the table, and I think that is the one kind of saving grace that we have, that we're not completely cut adrift from the rest. But yeah, there was a lot of pressure going into that Kilmarnock game, and obviously it started with the best possible start for us, with Robbie Dees, the Kilmarnock defender, getting a straight red. However, it was a yellow that the referee gave initially, which I don't understand, because it looked a red card all day, every day for me. I don't know why VAR
What's
had
not
to
to
get involved.
understand, Alan? It's a Scottish official. Scottish referees are
Fair,
fucking atrocious.
yeah, fair
And
enough. Fair
that's
enough.
just the latest in a very long line of evidence of that. To that fact,
Yeah,
it's embarrassing.
yeah, it was a really dangerous tackle, and I don't understand why the referee needed VAR to have him see it effectively. So yeah, that was it was a good start for us, and I was watching the game and I thought, right, that's a perfect start to a game that does have that high pressure on it, because it's an important game for us, and obviously we've spoken about the December fixtures and stuff, and we'll probably touch on them as we go along here, but I looked at it and I thought that's a brilliant start. You know, Kilmarnock down to 10 men, although it is a Derek McInnes side, so you know they're going to be organised, they're going to be drilled in what to do, and they're going to be very difficult to break down. But I still felt we had an opportunity, obviously, with the players on the pitch that we put out there. Up until, like you say, James Penrice has his brain fart and has a high foot in the box when the ball's already going out of play. I will give him one, as you say. I'll give him one. I think he's earned that at the moment, but it was a silly thing to do. It was a silly decision to make, to give the penalty, and then obviously Craig Gordon just doesn't get near it, and it's a good penalty from Bruce Anderson, to be fair. But yeah, it was after 20 minutes, and from the minute that Kilmarnock had the man sent off up until the penalty, they were the better team. So, I'm not going to say the goal was coming, but it didn't. It almost didn't surprise me. Obviously, it surprised me in the nature of it, but yeah, like you said, it was embarrassing. It was just not good enough, and we've kind of spoken a lot about different things and tactics, etc. And I think Kilmarnock with Derek McInnes, they just defended because they had a lead. They sat in, they defended, they didn't need to attack us, but they played on the counter, and we got nowhere near them. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, if Kilmarnock had won that game by 3 goals to 0, we wouldn't have had anything to complain about, because Kilmarnock had a couple of very good chances, and Gordon made a couple of very good saves as well. So it could have been a lot worse if not for Craig Gordon, and I feel like we're saying that quite often at the moment. Um, but yeah, it was embarrassing, and you are absolutely right. The whole thing for me is that defending a low block situation and trying to attack a low block, which is what Kilmarnock were obviously playing. We just had nothing. We had no pace, and I mean it's something that we've levelled at the team quite a lot over the last few weeks and months. A real lack of pace in forward areas, and people that listen to this podcast often know my thoughts on Forestino. They know how much I adore the man, but he was chief in just being invisible. Our entire forward line just had nothing. There was a real lack of movement, and I'm probably going to paraphrase Critchley now. That the lack of movement, the lack of intelligence, both on and off the ball, it was alarming. And that, I've said for a long time, even while we've been in this poor run of form, I don't worry about relegation, and I don't see us going down, and I still maybe don't. And maybe some people might comment on this and say that I'm deluded or whatever. I still don't see it, but we are definitely a candidate at the moment, and rightly so. But that performance, and the thing is, I don't even really want to talk much about the game, because there's not really a lot to it. We just huffed and puffed and sideways and backwards the whole game. And that was the most frustrating thing. When you're down, when you're up a man, you should be taking the game to the opponent. You should be going after them. And I know we didn't have Lawrence Shankland leading the line. I know we didn't have Benny in midfield. And I know we didn't have Frankie Kent at the back. And that's three big players for us. But the players in that park, and those that Critchley put on, should have had enough about them. And they just didn't. And like you say, it was embarrassing.
Yeah. One guy that I will give credit to for having a go was Jan Danda. He came excruciatingly close a couple of times to equalise, and he hit the bar, especially on one occasion. And he delivered a couple of really decent balls in, particularly from set pieces. Um, it's just rotten luck on his part that when he has given us one of those displays that we've been kind of looking for out of Danda all season, no one else on the park could be arsed.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
Musa, I felt, was very poor. Um, Vargas was anonymous. I'm starting to wonder what exactly is it that this guy is supposed to offer us going forward, because there were a couple of times where once again it was all about Vargas. He wanted to, pick out the telly moment rather than playing the sensible ball. I've run all out of patience for him at this point. He needs to get his head out of his arse or just get lost.
Yeah,
Um,
no,
if he's
I'm
not going
totally
to
with
put
you.
in an effort, he's going to need to be sold ultimately, to whoever will take him,
Yeah,
because he's
no,
he's actively hurting this attack
yeah.
far too often for my liking.
No, I totally agree with you, and I think I meant to kind of mention something that you spoke about, like the Jamestown guys are going to have to be cranking up the algorithms and stuff. I do think obviously the need for a centre half has obviously jumped to the front of the queue in terms of recruitment, but I think the striking department is something that Critchley said when he first came in. We need to be better in both boxes, and now we've lost arguably two of our better central defenders. I know, Kingsley doesn't really get into the team when everybody's fit, but when he does, he very rarely puts a foot wrong. And you've got a misfire in Shankland. Okay, he scored two against Dundee, and he was obviously suspended against Kilmarnock, but he needs some backup. He needs some help up there. So, for Critchley to say when he walks in the door, we need to be better in both boxes, nothing has really improved in either of those boxes. And that's not entirely Critchley's fault. And I've seen some people criticizing him, and don't get me wrong, he maybe deserves a little bit of it, but he's working with a group of players that are not his. He's got a philosophy, he's got an idea, and he's sticking to it. And I kind of applaud him for that. There is an element of should he change that philosophy to suit the players we have? Or is it a case of no, stick to what you're doing and stick to what you want the players to do, and then get the players in that can do it? There's two different kind of schools of thought on it, and I wonder what your thoughts are on that. But as I say, I think Critchley's remarks after the game were absolutely spot on. I think he spoke about just being totally confused about what he saw. He said, the fans were right to boo because that sort of standard of performance is unacceptable for a club of this level. And he was absolutely right. He said his blood was boiling because he as a manager, they obviously they were in Copenhagen in midweek, but they've come back. They won't have not done any homework on Kilmarnock. They won't have not done any research. They won't have not done any training for that, match preparation type stuff. You're telling me that Neil Critchley has told these players how he wants them to play in the game against Kilmarnock. And okay, the red card changes it a bit. But all of Critchley's work and all of his team's work goes out the window. And then obviously we see that on the pitch and you go, where are they even listening? The intelligence, and I've spoken a lot about player intelligence on this podcast over the years, and Liam Boyce is a man that I've always said is a very intelligent footballer and always seems to know where he needs to be. When he came on against Kilmarnock, I don't think he was particularly bad, but that was based off the fact of the players that he'd replaced being woeful. Um, there's just not a lot of footballing intelligence in this team, it would seem, especially in a situation like that.
Absolutely. It seems to me that whenever Benny Beningame isn't on the pitch, the football IQ of the club drops
Yeah.
uh, to a catastrophic degree. Benny, I think, is probably the most intelligent footballer we have on the park. It's why he and Devlin have always worked so well together in the past. It's why he and Boateng work very well together. But if Benny's not on the field to be the sort of general pulling the strings, the you can forget it. Like they don't have any cohesiveness to them whatsoever. At times, it's like they're 11 strangers who've never met before. That have just been sort of clumped together and told, right, jump on the park and play a game of football together, which is unacceptable. A lot of these players have been here for a couple of years now, some of them even more. Most of them have been here since at least last year, and we finished in a very strong position last season. We are in Europe again. What has happened to this team that is so bad that has caused them to be rock bottom in the league when
Yeah.
just a year ago we were flying high? Like this time last year, we were kind of starting off what proved to be a phenomenal run of form that basically saw us take third by canter. It is complete insanity that this club has gone from being that good to being this bad in such a short time. The
Yeah.
personnel is largely the same. The additions that we've made should have, on paper, improved the team. So what the hell is going on with these guys that has caused them to have such a drop off in form and cohesion and just general, like you say, football intelligence? Because this is by no possible metric is this acceptable from a Hearts team, especially a Hearts team. And you sent me earlier something to do with the wage bill. Was it something
Yeah.
like 16.5 million is the wage bill, and it's
Yeah.
basically the highest by a country mile outside the old firm? What
Uh-huh.
are they being paid for?
I know.
Because it
I know.
certainly doesn't seem to be to win football matches lately. It's absolutely mind-boggling how piss poor this team has been so far this year.
Yeah.
It's been an omni-shambolic season. It's not just the last game there, winning against Dundee. And I said it last week on the show, that win against Dundee doesn't take us all that much further forward unless we can start to replicate that form. That's immediately gone right out the window. There we are back to capitulating to not just an inferior team, 10 men.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a
No, I
team that's
totally.
already beaten Hearts in a game that Hearts should have won,
Yeah.
because we
I
are
know.
far too good to be laying down to teams like that, and to go down for them to go down to 10 men and for Hearts to capitulate that fucking badly. We were lucky it wasn't 3 or 4-0, and we have
Yeah.
Craig Gordon and the centre halves to thank for that. Where is the midfield? Where is the attacking?
I
It's
totally
a
get it.
disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace, and I don't know that Shanklin would have added much to that. based on last week, it's possible he would have, because we know that he does go on streaks. When he scores, he tends to score in bunches. So there was no reason to think he wouldn't score on Sunday there. But that is no way to run to play a football season. If you're relying on one guy that much, it is just
Yeah,
impossible to win with that model. The
yeah,
rest of them need
no,
to step up. Vargas is apparently Premier League quality as far as he's concerned. Forrest is a proven commodity at this level. Where did that go? All of a sudden,
yeah,
he's just completely out of form as well. Spittle, I'll give a little bit more leeway to, because he has been very solid. And
yeah,
Spittle, while he didn't put in a great performance, his effort level was still there. Danda, on Sunday, like I say, he was pretty decent. Just didn't have a final product. Overall on the season, though, he's not exactly been all that impressive. And Musa was poor, to put it generously.
no. I think
Liam
you're right.
Boyce, as much as I love the man, came on, and there's zero excuse for him not burying that rebound late on.
Yeah, yeah, no, I
We
totally
talk
agree.
about his, we've talked about his football intelligence. How the hell has he managed to kick his own ankle like that?
I think,
He's 2 yards
I,
out. If that, it's just
yeah, I think the Boyce one is difficult because I think, and this is kind of a point I wanted to make before we kind of talk a little bit about the sort of player mentalities and attitudes around the club. But the thing with Liam Boyce that gets me, and the thing with the substitutes that gets me as well, like Critchley's throwing these guys on, and they've not really kicked a lot of footballs. Um, Boyce
this
is
is fair. Yeah,
Boyce has barely played a game. George Grant gets the odd minutes here and there, but these guys don't have futures at Hearts, and we know that. Like we can see that. And I like Yandanda. I think there is definitely a player in there, but I just haven't seen it yet. And I wonder if Critchley is thinking the same thing, because Critchley obviously worked with him when he was younger at Liverpool, and maybe he's looking at him now and going, "You've not developed how I thought you would." Maybe there's an element of that, and obviously that's due to Yandander's career, etc. Maybe going in a different trajectory than what Critchley maybe thought it would early on. But like I say, that the players that are being brought on the pitch is because that's all we've got, and you're looking at these guys and you're thinking, can we rely on these guys to get us back into this game? I don't think we can, and it was just we'll kind of wrap up Kilmarnock before we kind of talk about the next bit, but the the overall level was just not good enough. And for me, Neil Critchley, like he summed it up perfectly. He said, this has to be the line in the sand. This cannot happen again. Those were the words that he used, and he said that he'd left the
yeah,
players in the dressing room having a frank conversation with each other, which seems to be our go-to every time we're in a crisis. The players seem to sit in the dressing room and just
yeah.
talk to each other. I hope they're not just talking about what they're going to have for their dinner, or how long it's going to take them to get home on the bus. Because if it was up to me, none of them would have got on that bus to get home. They would have been walking back from Ayrshire, personally. But
Yeah.
to talk briefly about Critchley before I kind of mention the player mentalities and stuff. I like Neil Critchley, I really do, and I think he's very frank in his comments, and he's always very open and honest about what he sees, because he knows that fans see it as well, and he knows that he could come out and go, "Well, we dominated possession, we had more shots than Kilmarnock, we did this, we did that," but he came out after that game and there was not a single positive to take from it, because there wasn't one. He wasn't going to try and find one just to, put a wee tick in a box and say, "Oh, but we did this well." The fact is, we had all the possession, but we did fuck all with it, and that is the biggest concern, especially in a game of that
76%
magnitude.
of the possession, to be
Yeah,
specific. We outshot them 21. We had 14 shot attempts, only 4 of which were on target, which in
I
itself
know.
tells the story.
Well, that's the
Um,
thing. I don't even
and
remember those shots, to be honest with you.
yeah, in
It's
Critchley, you,
just,
you talk about Critchley, and the word he used was that he was stunned.
yeah,
And that's probably a valid response to it. It was a stunningly bad performance, which, considering how bad Hearts have been this season, is almost impressive.
yeah,
It is
no,
the
definitely.
worst performance that I can recall seeing from Hearts in recent memory.
Yeah,
2013-14, Gary Locke's boys got relegated. It was understandable. They were always trying to ice skate uphill that season. They had a 15-point deduction, and their average age was like 18, if that.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
2020, Hearts get relegated. It was because of the cancellation of the season. We had probably, I think, enough time to get out of relegation before that season had ended. And I genuinely believe that if the season had continued, we most likely would have managed to get out of that. That's not how it played out. Um, what the fuck is the excuse this year?
well, it's interesting that
Why are
it's
we sitting
interesting.
bottom in the?
Yeah,
Why are we sitting in last place?
because we're
Absolutely unacceptable.
because we're garbage, mate. Honestly, rubbish in both boxes. But I do think the
Yeah.
mentality is a big part of it, and I think that
Yes.
that's something that needs to be kind of explored. Yeah, I think we spoke about the sort of mentality as something that needs to be looked at. I think mostly, or certainly, one that jumps out to me is somebody that I'd mentioned earlier on in Andrew McKinley, the CEO. Now I understand, it's their job to talk in positive terms and be optimistic and look ahead and sort of try and kind of put a positive spin, like I was saying that Critchley could have done in his after match interview, but chose not to. Um, it's their job to be positive about the football club, and that's absolutely fine. However, when you hear Andrew McKinley talking about, oh, we can still finish top four, we're still it's still there, it's still an opportunity, and as I say, I know that it's their job to talk positively, and I understand that, but it doesn't go down well with the fan base because it just feels like they're disconnected from what's actually happening. And maybe they know what's actually happening. Maybe Andrew McKinley does see it with his eyes and goes, right, this is not good enough. But you know, be a bit more realistic. And I think it kind of leads on to another thing that I was going to talk about, that I briefly mentioned to yourself, was that Craig Halkett was asked for comment after the Kilmarnock game. And it's kind of the last thing I want to kind of touch on in terms of mentalities and stuff. But he suggested that as one of the two remaining players from the previous team that got relegated, he was asked, "Does it feel the same? Does there feel like there are similarities between that campaign and this one?" And he said, "No, it doesn't feel like that." And because the performances over the last few weeks have been good, and we've shown in spells what we can do, and I don't disagree with him there. I think that that's the thing for me. I've looked at, and this is me trying to cling to any form of positive thought off the back of Sunday. I've looked at the other games that we've lost this season, and you look at them and you go, in some of them we've been unlucky, in some of them we've just been against better sides. But we've always had something, we've always had a little bit of effort, we've always had energy, we've always done something. Even against the Old Firm, we came away from those games talking about missed opportunities, and that's something. But obviously, points are what matter. Points are the priority. Wins are the priority right now, and we're just not getting them. Do you think there needs to be, and do you think that the game against Kilmarnock can serve as a bit of a sort of reality check to some of these players? And it's a case of, look, this is a scrap. We are involved in this. Like, we have to embrace that. And I said after the game on social medias as well, I said, a lot of these players need to realize, and you touched on it, that they're not as good as they think they are. Kenny Vargas is not more than capable of playing at a higher level than Scottish football right now. You know, there are players in this team that I think do have high ceilings, and I'm not going to disagree with that. But right now, do they have the character and the fight and the mentality to scrap? Because, like I said at the start of this, I don't fear the relegation at the moment. I still don't, but we're definitely a candidate for it. And I think it's important that some of these players, if at least not publicly, they don't have to come out publicly and say, yeah, we're in a relegation scrap, but privately, at least, and amongst themselves, understand that this is the situation we're in, and they're going to have to roll their sleeves up to get us out of it. Because, as you touched on, and as I've said as well, this club, this playing staff, the wage budget that has been spent on them, they might not be the best Hearts team that we've seen in a long time, but it's certainly the most expensively assembled one. And it's not playing like that at the moment. They need to realise the situation we're in. And the one thing I took away from Halkett's comments, I don't know if they do realise the situation that we're in. And that is very concerning. Maybe that's just the way I'm reading it, mind you.
I agree with Craig Halkett in that this isn't the same as 2019-20. Uh, in my opinion, it is worse because the of how close we've been to getting something out of virtually every game that we've played this year, with the exception of Sunday.
Mm.
I think that's being looked at as a low point of the season so far with valid reason because we offered absolutely nothing and were toothless against a team that was down to 10 men for over 80 minutes. Um, in order to reach any sort of ceiling, they have to get off the floor first.
Yeah.
And that's where the morale, the chemistry, and the effort levels seem to be for a vast majority of this club. I personally am very much in fear of relegation at this stage, because how many times do we have to underperform before the players take a long enough look at themselves and say, right, we cannot allow this season to continue as it has so far. What are we, 17 games in or something now? And
Yep.
we have 3 wins
Yep. It's
out of
embarrassing, isn't it?
17. That is embarrassing. Absolutely, yeah. Um, we should be we should be beating the vast majority of the teams in this division, with the exception being the Old Firm and maybe Aberdeen, because Aberdeen are still a very strong football club. This has been the case for several years now, that we are very much in the top 3 or 4 teams in Scotland. We should be performing as such, and especially as, like you say, this has been one of the most expensively assembled Hearts sides since the Romanov days.
Yep. No, I
Um,
totally agree. Sorry, carry
we
on.
we are not we are not going to be able to, Jamestown or not, bring in the type of players that we're talking about bringing in if we get relegated. None of those guys are going to want to play in the Scottish Championship, so we can forget about it if we end up relegated, which is a real possibility. Like, we are already halfway through the season, almost give or take a couple of games. Like, we're pretty much halfway there. We have shown nothing that suggests to me that we're going to end up in the top 4. Um, which is where the guys that we're looking at apparently are going to be like saying, right, this is where you need to be for me to come along and take you to that next level, because it's that ultimately the next level after qualifying for Europe that Jamestown is allegedly going to magically take us. But we need to be there first. We can't be down here. We can't be down in the relegation zone and trying to call up some of these kind of talents that are down south, maybe, or in Europe, and say, "Oh, come join Hearts, and you'll be like a centerpiece of the squad. And here's the vision we have for the next 5 years." They're going to look at the table and say, "You guys are about to be relegated to the Scottish Championship. No, thank you."
Yeah. No, I totally
There's
agree. I
there's so
totally
much
agree.
there's so many different things that ride on this, financial aspects. The money that
Massively.
we get from qualifying for Europe consistently is a big part of our model. If we're not
Yeah.
anywhere near that, we can say goodbye to millions of pounds in lost revenue.
Hmm. No, I totally agree. It does balance a lot of things out in terms of that, and you're absolutely right in terms of the recruitment model relies on us being that team that is at that level that we want to be at. It's I think, like I mentioned earlier, and I kind of want to move on from Kilmarnock because I don't really feel like there's much more to say about it. We spoke last time about the games in December and how crucial they are, and you mentioned it as well that you're kind of already writing it off. We now have 2 games at home against St Johnstone and Hibs, and obviously those two are close to us in the table, so those games are important. And then we're away to Ross County, which is a tricky place to go. But again, like we've said, despite the form that we've been in, it is a winnable game because it should be. And we have won there previously. It's not as if it's impossible. So the next 3 domestic games, if they weren't vital already, they've become even more so now. And I think the one crumb of hope that I'm hanging on to is that 2 of the 3 are at home, and we do tend to seem to be better at home than we are on the road this season in particular. So that could be something. But in order for that to kind of build momentum, you need momentum to start somewhere. And I felt like it had started against Dundee, and then it's obviously come to a screeching halt against Kilmarnock. So
Yeah.
we'll be hoping for some sort of reaction to that. Obviously, prior to that, we have the game against Petrocub in the Europa Conference League, our last group stage game in the Conference League. And I'll kind of move on to that now, unless you've got anything you want to add before we kind of touch on that.
One other thing I was going to say is regarding, you mentioned earlier, the pressure that the players are under. And I would just reiterate what I said earlier this season. The pressure that they are under is self imposed. We are in a hell of our own making because of their consistent underperformance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they don't have anyone to blame but themselves. Ultimately, we have those 2 games coming up. They were must win before. At this stage, it is 6 points out of 6 and no excuses. I don't want to hear. There's a couple of things that I would like to see happen in the coming weeks. I do not want to hear a single word out of any Hearts player
Yeah,
until we
I'm
are in the
with you.
top 6. and I certainly do not want to see any photos of them laughing and joking around on the training ground. There's a tradition in Italian football called ritiro, which often happens. What will happen is if a team is doing particularly badly, they will essentially be locked away in a training camp for a couple of weeks. It would usually happen if there's an international break coming up, etc. Um, I'm not saying go quite that far because it is a frowned upon practice these days, but I think there should be a sort of a media lockdown in terms of like Hearts players coming out and offering their 2 cents. And I certainly wish that Andrew McKinlay would shut up. Why is he not in the press now saying, as a custodian of this club, I expect far better? Instead of saying we can still finish fourth, he should be publicly calling them out and saying, why the fuck are we not at least fourth? How much
Exactly.
money are we paying you guys to sit rock bottom in the division? And yet all we seem to hear out of McKinlay is fluff, just fluff.
Yep.
And ultimately,
Completely.
yeah, he needs to represent the club in a positive light, but he needs to be realistic and he needs to stop insulting the intelligence of the fan base.
Yep.
It is
I
a
think
fan-owned club. At the end of
yeah.
the day, he has a responsibility to us as the people who put money into it to be
Definitely.
honest with us and to say, yeah, it's not good enough, and here's what we're going to do to improve it. And here's the time scale, which is getting the margin of error is getting thinner and thinner. I don't believe there is one at this point. Hearts need to get their finger out of their arse, and now should have
Yeah.
been this Sunday, but we need to start winning matches consistently. When was the last time we won back-to-back matches? It's disgraceful.
It really is. And it's you're absolutely right what you say about McKinlay needs to kind of stop with all the fluff. He's one of these guys that seems to say a lot of words without really saying anything. And he does. You're right.
It's similar to the
It's
sorry, it's similar to the kind of reputation I think Joe Savage got with a lot of people. It was like, oh yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to sign him and blah blah blah. And it's like,
yeah,
mate, just do your job. Do your job as an executive at the football club. You have a responsibility to put us in the best position possible. If we're quite patently embarrassing ourselves every week on the pitch, for you to then turn around and gaslight the fan base into by saying, oh, we're not that bad. We're only a couple of things away from finishing fourth. It's like, no, get us there.
yeah,
You should be, if we are not there, you should be publicly demanding from every single one of those players an explanation as to why we're not there.
yeah, yeah. And I think the main thing I kind of want to touch on before we kind of talk about Petra Cup is that, like I said earlier, I don't blame Neil Critchley for this. I have a
I
little
don't
bit.
either.
I have a little bit where I'm like, right, are we at that point where yes, he has this philosophy and he wants to stick to it, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
does he have to acknowledge right now I don't have the players to do it? So let's play how these players can. Maybe there's an element of that, but the flip side of that is we've put in decent performances even in defeats, like I've spoken about. So there
Yeah,
is little shoots of things there. The players just need to get their fingers out, like you've said, and we've kind of
100%.
reiterated it many times tonight.
Yeah. If
It's
there's one
just
small gripe, sorry that to butt in again,
no.
but if there's one small gripe that I could have with Neil Critchley, it's that he keeps parading George Grant out there when
Yeah,
he has Yutaro Oda rotting on the bench, who Yutaro Oda hasn't kicked the ball this season, so we're not expecting him to play 90 minutes and be an absolute game changer. But for God's sake, give him the chance because George Grant is not doing it.
yeah. I think again, as we tend to do in these, you make a point and then something comes back to my head, and I think the thing that I want to say about that is that right now out on loan we have Aidan Denham, we have Finlay Pollock.
Yeah,
There's two. We have Lewis Nielsen, who's a centre back. I don't know whether there's an option to bring him back, but you're not telling me that an Aidan Denham can't do more than a George Grant can. You're not telling me that a Finlay Pollock is not
exactly.
worth a shot over and I hate saying it, an Alan Forrest who has underperformed in recent weeks. Give these guys an opportunity. Even Macaulay Tate, he's still at the club and he's sitting on the bench, not
Yeah,
getting the minutes. I wonder if we'll see him on Thursday. And kind of to move into Thursday, there's there's two sides of it for me. I wonder what the team selection is going to look like. I wonder, is he going to make changes, or at least the changes he can make? Obviously, Musa's not going to be able to play, so that'll be a changed instantly. Shankland will come back in because he's back. Will we see a Macaulay Tate given an opportunity? Will we see these guys put out there? It's like, right, do you know what? Show me something different because I've not given you a chance to show me. So this is your opportunity. Will we see a Yan Danda, even an Oda? It's one of those games that obviously all we need is a point to get to qualify for the knockout playoff phase, which, to be honest, I could take or leave it right now. I'm really not that arsed about it, but it would
Mhm.
be nice and it would give us a few extra pounds in the bank, which would obviously be welcome. But again, like I've said about every Europa League conference game this season, it's just, especially where we are in the league, it just doesn't feel right that we're in Europe. And I know, like
Yeah,
I said at the start of this, I haven't done a lot of research, and I haven't because I wanted to come on and just rant and see where it took us. But in terms of Petro Club, I did a little bit of background on them, and they seem to be a side that have kind of been building over the last few years, and then last season it culminated in them having one of their best seasons to date, which is why they've then qualified for the Conference League. The last couple of games that they played in Europe, they got a point against a certain Istanbul Besiktas, who we know very well, and they also lost narrowly at home to Real Betis by a score of just 1-0. So, you know, they may well be one of the teams that are already eliminated from the Conference League with one game to go. I think there's only two sides, and it's them and somebody else. Can't remember off the top of my head who that second team is, but I wonder how they'll approach the game. Their manager seemed to say that, they're going to go into this game because they know wins and points get them money, and that's what they're in it for. And I feel like that's kind of what we're in it for as well at this point. So they're certainly not going to come to Tynecastle with their feet up thinking, well, we're out already, so this is just a jolly for us. And they do seem to be a side that could cause us problems. From, again, what I've read, they play very much sort of short ball out from the back, play it out, which could play into our hands if the Neil Critchley high press can work. Because if we can press them high up the pitch and make them make mistakes, that's how we'll get in. So it'll be very, very interesting. But I do wonder, as I say, how they'll approach it versus how we'll approach it. I think, it's very telling, and it obviously reads the mood of the fan base at the moment, that it's £17 a ticket in a vital European tie, which will be, if we manage to get the point that we need, it'll be the first time we've made it to the knockout group stage, the knockout phases of a European competition for many, many years. It's not selling out. And I think the club should be looking at that. An alarm bell should be ringing, because that is the mood of the fan base at the moment.
yeah. I had a look at tickets myself. So it was £17 a ticket, and noticed that there's quite a lot of seats still available. Um, so it was an 8 p.m. kickoff. Decided in short order not to bother. I have many character flaws, Alan, and one of them, as you'll be well aware, is a petty streak. I don't believe that any of these players deserve to be playing in Europe, quite frankly, and they certainly don't deserve to be representing our colours in a European competition. Um, so I couldn't care less about Petro Cup on Thursday, quite frankly.
I'm with you.
I genuinely just don't care. Yeah, there's the financial aspect of it, and it would be nice to get the win and the money that comes with that, and qualification and the funds that come with that. But these players don't deserve it, and with how poor we've been domestically, I'm just finding it a massive struggle to give a crap. Um, and that's just my honest opinion of the Petro Cup game. I'm not sure. I'm not so sure that it's a stick on that we're going to win that thing. Um, if we managed somehow to scrape through by getting a point, I would be more pissed off than relieved, because it would just be another case of like, well, you've managed to piss the bed against a team that you're vastly superior to, despite getting through. Um, if we don't win that game by 3 or 4, I'm not going to be satisfied. And I realise that that's probably an unfair thing to be thinking going into a game of any sort, and quite disrespectful to the opponent. But I assure you, it's not about that. It's about my frustrations with our players and how poor they've been. Because
There
scraping
definitely
through
needs to be
against
a
the Petrikov
reaction.
1-0 isn't going to do it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've been waiting for a reaction since August. We've been waiting for it to come. We've been waiting for them to string together a couple of results and start to build momentum. Like I said last time, you need to replicate the success and build momentum. The odd win, like what's that like 1 in 6 roughly is not going to get us anywhere.
Totally agree, John. And I think, just to kind of wrap things up, unless you had anything else you wanted to add, I'm going to ask you for a score prediction for the game that you have written off and don't care about, because I feel like that'll be quite interesting. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Well, unless you want to give me a score prediction, then you feel free to. But
I'm an idiot,
what are
so
your
I'm going to
thoughts?
say I'm an absolute idiot, so I'm going to predict a 2-0 Hearts win. But I wouldn't be surprised if it ended 0-0 or 1-1, to be honest. I'll go 2-0 though. I think having Shankland back could be massive.
Yeah,
Hopefully he's going to be coming into more on Thursday with the armband back on and a pissed off attitude and looking to lead by example on the pitch. He's found his scoring shoes again last week. I just hope that he packs the right boots for the trip to Tynecastle on Thursday because we need him. We need him more than ever.
yeah,
Um, that's pretty much all I've got to say. Sunday was an embarrassment. It was disgraceful. It was a shameful performance in a season of omni shambles. It, like Critchley said, it cannot be allowed to happen again. It should never have happened in the first place. This lot need to get their heads out of their arses and start winning football games.
yeah,
Period. End of story.
yeah.
They have no margin for error from here on out, as far as I'm concerned.
No, I think that's fair, and I think you've summed up this week's podcast in about 2 minutes there. So that's that's ideal. No, I think like you, I do expect to see a reaction on Thursday, and I know I've just said it's not sold out. There will still be a decent crowd because as much as we fizz and are raging about Hearts and their current situation and their current position in the table and some of the current playing squad, it's still Hearts. And fans are nutters. Football fans are nutters. It's like an illness. You can't not look away. You have to. There's so many times when I've seen Hearts not in good form, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to watch next week. I'm not going to watch next week. And then you find yourself tuning in, or you find yourself going to Tynecastle because you think, you know what? I've got the bug, and I need to, and it's a vicious circle that continues. But hopefully, as we approach the festive period, there Petro Club will be in a mood for giving and will allow us to have 3 points because that would certainly do us the
Yeah,
world of good ahead of, as I
yeah.
said, those two massive, massive home ties against St Johnstone and Hibs. I'm not going to ask you for thoughts or predictions on them because I feel like we could be here all night on those, and we'll talk
My
about
thoughts
those
on
in a
those
future
both are,
episode.
yeah. My thoughts on those two are simple: 6 points out of six, and no
Yeah,
excuses.
yeah, I'm with you there.
Period.
I'm with you
They
there.
have no margin for error. If they
Nah,
lose or even drop points in either of those two games, it's going to. Oh, I don't even want to think about it. I will be so fucking infuriated that I
I'm,
don't know if
I'm,
I'll be able to speak on this podcast with, with
I'm gonna have to
without
do one
saying
on my
something
own.
extremely offensive. Yeah, I will just scream at the top of my lungs for about half an hour continuously, uh, which I do quite regularly anyway. But I've managed to avoid doing it on camera so far.
That's
Um,
that's the life
it's
of a Hearts fan, mate. That's what we do.
yeah. I usually, well, traditionally these days we do end the show with Craig Gordon, and allow me to once again give him his props. He was outstanding again, but this all ties to that as well. This could potentially be his last season, and here we are spoiling what could be the last season of, in my view, our greatest ever player with these displays. I'm not going to call them performances because that would be laughable way to describe
Yeah.
the way Hearts are playing. But the displays from the Hearts players this season potentially risk us ruining that, like the possible send off for one of our greatest of all
Well,
time.
if
And
if
that
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 were to,
adds to the frustration for me. Like
yeah,
he deserves better.
listen, if that were to happen, I would be chasing every single player out of the Orium and telling them that they're not allowed to come back.
Yeah,
Because yeah, as we've always said and as we always say, it has become somewhat of a tradition when you and I are on these podcasts together. We end on a high note, and that high note is usually involving Craig Gordon. Without him, Kilmarnock could have quite easily won that game by a considerably larger margin. So,
yes,
as I say, we have him to thank for at least making it slightly less embarrassing, if that's possible. But as I say, folks, we're gonna wrap it there. As ever, and as I said at the start, you can find all of our social media links down in the description. Please feel free to drop a subscription on the YouTube channel. As I always say every week, your support is massively, massively appreciated, and it helps us to basically figure out what we want to talk about and how we want to put it out there to you. So thank you as ever for joining us this evening. And John, thank you as ever for joining me for yet another therapy session on Heart of Midlothian Football Club.
It's always a pleasure to see you, Alan, if nothing else.
I know the pleasure's all mine, my man, and I say it every week, but it is very, very true. You know, there's nothing like a bit of wallowing in misery with your mates about football. That's what it is. But
It does love company.
It does indeed. It does indeed. But I'm actually away to take up cricket because football is exhausting me. But yes, as I say, folks, if you want to leave your score predictions for the Petro Cup game and even the games against St Johnstone and Hibs, or if you just want to have a rant about what that display, as John so well put previously there, about that wonderful display against Kilmarnock, please do let us know your thoughts, and we will see you back here from next week for more, hopefully, positive news to bring you, but I can't guarantee it.
Because we are raving masochists. Because we are masochists, Mr. Scrimgeour, and we can't get enough.
Neither we can. That's why we keep coming back every week. That's what I'm saying to you. It's an illness, mate. It's an illness. Anyway, thank you as ever, folks, for listening, and have a good one if you can. Cheers. Bye for now.